Welcome to the Center for Architecture. I'm Jesse Lazar. I'm Executive Director here at AI New York and the Center for Architecture. We're thrilled to be here tonight for Humanist Modernity, Stanisława and Maciej Nowicki, Polish architects in the US. This program is happening in conjunction with the exhibition of the same name, Humanist Modernity, Maciej and Stanisława Nowicki, on view at the United Nations headquarters in New York, opening yesterday, January 15th, and up through January 26th. And it's not your only chance to see this exhibition. We are excited to announce that we'll be working with the curatorial and design team to bring the exhibition here to the Center for Architecture next summer, 2025. So stay tuned for that. The exhibition and related programs are co-organized by the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage of the Republic of Poland, the National Institute of Architecture and Urban Planning, the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Poland to the United Nations in New York, and the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. And while you're here with us tonight, we encourage you to check out the exhibitions that we currently have on view. You'll find Center for Architecture Lab, Seeking Refuge and Making Home in New York City, right here in the adjacent galleries, and upstairs on the upper two levels, Generation Proxima. Both exhibitions are on view through March 23rd this year. And now I'm pleased to introduce the designer of the Humanist Modernity exhibition and principal of the firm Only If, Karolina Czechek.
Thank you, Jesse, for the introduction, and thank you very much, Center for Architecture, for hosting us today and supporting all the exhibition and event planning related endeavors, especially Katie Mullen and Sophie Cooker, who were helping us with the exhibition tours. As Jesse mentioned, I'm an architect of the exhibition, but there is a huge team that worked on this project, especially curator Kacper Kępiński, who is sitting here, who will be giving the presentation. I'm very happy to be an architect of this exhibition because I'm myself a Polish architect who is working in the US, and I'm also a critic at the School of Architecture at Yale. And Stanisława Nowicka, as you will learn shortly, was a prominent figure in academia in the US as well. I'll give you a couple details about the organizers, but also all the team that worked on this presentation and on this exhibition. I guess I have my competitions at the office still in my mind, hence the word. So as Jesse mentioned, the organizers of the exhibitions are National Institute of Architecture and Urban Planning. The exhibition is co-organized by the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Poland to the United Nations in New York, and under the patronage of Krzysztof Szczerski, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Poland to the United Nations in New York. And special thanks go to Dominika Stecyk, who is head of the Communication and Public Diplomacy representative, who worked really hard to make this exhibition happen. Our programming partner is Polish Cultural Institute of New York, and especially thanks to Izabela Gola, who gave idea for this panel, and it's here with us today. Other partners are Consulate General of the Republic of Poland in New York, and of course AIA New York and Center for Architecture. The curators, there is a scientific curator who is Bolesław Stelmach. We have the main curator of the exhibition, Kacper Kępiński. And I worked on the exhibition architecture, but there are many people involved in the whole process. That includes Mateusz Wodarek, Weronika Sołtysik, and Dominik Witaszczyk. Our fabricators, Artpach and Onimo. Visual identity people, Katarzyna Nestorowicz. Editing and then translators, Urszula Drabińska and Natalia Raczkowska, who is here today as well. And we also want to send acknowledgements to people who were instrumental in putting together this exhibition, and that includes Peter Nowicki and Nowicki's family, who we were in touch with and who were visiting yesterday during the opening, Agata Lupomeska, Izabela Iwanicka-Dzierżawska, Piotr Kibord, and Ewa Perlińska-Kobierzyńska. I'll try to switch between Polish and English smoothly. A short word about Nowicki's. You will hear more from the curator. and other speakers. But you should know that Maciej, and sometimes known in the US as Matthew Nowicki, and Stanisława Sandecka-Nowicka are two significant figures in the history of American and Polish architecture. Stanisława Sandecka-Nowicka was a talented graphic artist and designer and was the first woman in the United States history to receive the title of Professor of Architecture while teaching at the University of Pennsylvania School of Fine Arts, now School of Design. Stanisława Sandecka was also awarded the Medal of American Institute of Architects in 1987 and the Gloria Artis Medal in 2016 for their contribution to American and Polish culture, respectively. Maciej Nowicki was a cultural advisor to the Polish diplomatic mission and later participated as a Polish consultant to the Board of Design work at the new UN headquarters. He became part of the working group headed by Wallace Harrison, which included notable figures such as Le Corbusier and Oscar Niemeyer. He was appointed the first director of the School of Architecture at the North Carolina State College, and is an author, together with Stanisława Nowicka, of the Dorton Arena in Raleigh, North Carolina. Nowicki's last major commission was the design of Chandigarh, a new capital of the northern Indian state of Punjab, on which he worked with Albert Mayer and Julian Whitlace. Nowicki died tragically in a plane crash caused by an engine fire above Libyan desert in August 1950. I think Kacper will be showing exhibition design. I'll let you kind of look at it. I'm not going to explain it too much, but the idea of the exhibition was to, especially in the context of UN headquarters and a space that we were given, which is quite overwhelming with beautiful murals and kind of large-scale tapestries, to create a space in which we can admire and kind of deeply kind of engage with drawings of Nowicki's, which unfortunately many of those stayed still on the paper or trace paper. Therefore, it was important for us to create a kind of a space for contemplation, and we're using curtains as a kind of medium to create the space and organize the open plan of the exhibition. And now I'm going to introduce the speakers for tonight in the order in which they will be speaking. So we'll start with Kacper Kępiński, the mastermind of this exhibition. Kacper Kępiński is an architect, architecture critic, curator of architectural exhibitions. He's head of the Department of External Projects and Exhibitions at the National Institute of Architecture and Urban Planning. He's also a co-founder of Association Space, People, City, and a member of the board of the Architecture Institute Foundation. He's a regular collaborator with the quarterly magazine Autoportret and editor of the portal Architecture and Business. He's curator of exhibitions, including Eastern Wall, Architecture of Zbigniew Karpiński, and Anthropocene, with upcoming publication. He co-teaches design courses at the Faculty of Architecture at VUT in Brno, focusing on inclusive housing architecture. The second speaker is Burak Erdim, who is here, who is Associate Professor of Architecture at the North Carolina State University College of Design, where he coordinates graduate concentration in the history and theory of architecture. Erdim authored Landed Internationals, Planning Cultures, the Academy and the Making of the Modern Middle East, University of Texas Press 2020. He is a contributor to Aggregate Architectural History Collaborative projects titled Systems in the South, and serves on the editorial board of Southern Cultures. Erdim research has been supported by grants from the Andrew Mellon Initiative in Urban Landscape Studies at Dumbarton Oaks, the Aga Khan Program in Islamic Architecture at MIT, and the Fulbright Program. And he's very much familiarized with Nowicki's work, and he's going to talk about the kind of current outlook on those creations. And last but not least is Łukasz Stanek, who is Professor of Architectural History at Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Łukasz authored Henri de Fibre on Space, Architecture, Urban Research, and the Production of Theory, University of Minnesota Press 2011, and Architecture in Global Socialism, Eastern Europe, West Africa, and the Middle East in the Cold War, Princeton University Press 2020. Łukasz taught at the ETH Zurich, the University of Manchester, and held guest professorships at Harvard University and the University of Ghana in Accra. After presentation, we'll have a short discussion and we'll open with questions to the audience. But without further ado, I'm inviting Kacper to the first presentation.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you all for coming today. It's really important for us, this project, this exhibition, to be shown in the space that was maybe not designed by one of them, but the place that they life are connected with, so the UN headquarters. And this is also what makes this couple, their history, a perfect subject for the exhibition. Not only their work, not only their designs, but also the story of their life and how it perfectly reflects the turbulent times of the beginning of the 20th century. And yeah, here. But first, we'll see what Carolina shortly described. So this is the exhibition that is now standing in UN with a Chandigarh model on the first the table, and Carolina herself in the middle, and. Yes, so we try to create this space in the very beautiful but demanding and decorated lobby. And yes, but going to the topic of the exhibition, I will start with short biographies of both of architects. And Stanisława Sandecka was as mentioned, the first woman in United States history to receive the title of Professor of Architecture, but also the first female professor at University of Pennsylvania. And she began her career as a student at the Faculty of Architecture at the Warsaw Polytechnic, where she also met Maciej. And this is when they duo began. The fact that they were both engaged in their project on the same level. It's not the story of one leading person and then the supporting one, because they even had the one signature they were using for their designs. And the first projects were mostly designs for the graphic materials, which we will see later. But Stanisława also worked at for the illustrations and interiors. The Polish Pavilion at the 1937 exposition in Paris, but also after receiving the scholarship of the French government, she spent a year working at the Le Corbusier atelier. And after the war, she joined the Bureau for the Rebuilding of the Capital, creating plans for the reconstruction of Warsaw, and then in States, mostly engaged in the designs of interior designs. So, for instance, the Carolina Country Club, which we'll also see later. She began her academic career at University of Penn in 1951, so 1 year after her husband died, and received the title of professor 12 years later. And here we have also the pictures from the interior design furniture store in Philadelphia that she started with Georgia Gray. But I also highlighted in this curriculum from the University of Pennsylvania that yes, this politics, this social context was very important for both of them. So here we can see that one of the tasks for the students that in the program she created was very much focused on this new world order after the war, the peace, not giving the new divisions, but to unite the world through the architecture or create architectural symbols for it. And Maciej lives is also it's also reflecting these times very much because he moved several times. She was born in eastern Russia. Then they moved with his family to Krakow. But his first interest in drawing particularly blossomed during his visit to the Art Institute of Chicago, where his father was a consul after the Poland regained independence in 1918. And during the war, he was still active at the Warsaw Polytechnical School. Together with Stanisława, they took part in several competitions. He never stopped teaching, even though the teaching was illegal during the occupation. And here we can see some first works of the duo, so the posters for the architectural ball for the Warsaw University of Technology. And between 31 and 36, they created about 20 posters designs. And as I mentioned before, they were active in just after finishing the school. Here we can see the design for the Eagle Sports Club in Warsaw, together with Zbigniew Karpiński, and competition entry for the first mosque in Warsaw, done together with Stanisława and Maciej, and never built, as most of their projects. Then the tourist hotel in Augustów, northern Poland, Polish pavilion at the New York World Fair with Jan Bogusławski, which we're also now preparing the exhibition about. So much more of the designs that already had some particular structural or architectural features that can be recognized as Nowicki's work, as those remarkable arches or vaults, columns, and interest in creating space, architectural values by using some structural systems. And then we have war, and the Warsaw, the city that Nowickis were living in, was in about 85% destroyed, and it was described as a sea of rubble after the war. So they immediately after the war, they joined the effort to create the plans for rebuilding. But even during the occupation, they were working on some projects that then, just after the war, could be finished, as this small chapel in Laski, where Nowicki spent some time during the Warsaw Rising. He found refuge in this small village. And rebuilding of Warsaw was task design that was connected with those masses of rubble that limited in some way the possibilities of reconstructing the city or the pace of reconstruction. However, the people of Warsaw were already coming back to there to try to rebuild it on their own. Here we can see the comparison of Warsaw before the war and after the war, what was remained, and then the designs of Nowicki. Here we have business districts planned on the site of the former Warsaw Ghetto in Grzybów. Here, instead of removing the rubble, Nowicki decided to incorporate into his design to differentiate the streetscape. So we had the two levels, the original one, the pre-war level with this church, which partly survived the war, and then using the rubble, he created the new street level, the plateau on which he built the new houses, and he also proposed to use this rubble to create some kind of landscaping that could increase the pedestrians' safety and talk a lot in this project descriptions about the perception of the spaces to create intimate spaces. The scale of the buildings, it's not huge, so it was all about the human perspective. However, for the different parts of the cities, the design differs. Here is a more traditional approach to the ministries district and some perspective drawings. Also, the Vistula river bank with a national museum, but also the remarkable design for the new Polish parliament, where we already seen this suspended roof on the cables and some solutions that then he will follow in designs for Raleigh or Chandigarh. And then in 1945, Nowicki went to United States as a cultural advisor to the Polish diplomatic mission and consultant in the board of design's work on the new UN headquarters. He was involved in the works from the very beginning, discussing the location, possible location. He opted for the San Francisco first, and he became this member of a group headed by Wallace Harrison, which included such figures as Le Corbusier or Oscar Niemeyer. And but for Nowicki, this design was something more than simple the headquarters for the international organization. That was a means of defining the identity of the organization, but he also saw it as a physical manifestation of the united post-war world, something which we later saw in this curriculum by Stanisława Nowicka. And he was the author of 5 concepts, but only 2 survived to present days. This is the design for assembly hall with decorated vault that he designed. Yes, sorry, it's much better visible here. So, he also designed the general structure with. Experimented a lot with the public space accessibility, the differentiation of levels of access for public, something which is now not implemented there. But also he took a very active role on the stage when, after the cost cuts, they had to redesign some parts of the UN headquarters. I will shortly go through Raleigh project because Burak Erdim will talk about it more. So here we have North Carolina State Fairgrounds that were made thanks to collaboration with William Henley Dietrich, and the designs were made from the beginning of 1950s. And then the part of this master plan was, of course, the Dorton Arena and the most recognizable design of Nowicki, and the only fully implemented, however, already after his death. For me personally, the design that is the most interesting, or there is the most of things to dig in and discover also for the contemporary architecture and the approach that we can take, and something that that is still valid is the Chandigarh project, last major commission of Nowicki, on which he worked with Albert Mayer and Julian Whitleys. And India offered Nowicki the opportunity to apply his experience in completely new context, and here his ability to fit into unfamiliar environment, draw from local knowledge, and adapt to previously unfamiliar climatic and social conditions is evident. They talk a lot. The Nowicki works is also very often described, or he himself, as a person that always wanted to understand not the client, but the people he was designing for or with, and trying to find the local traditional values that then he could translate into modern architecture. So the city plan was based on the leaf scheme, with the main road through which you could access the smaller neighborhoods that could again create some more intimate neighborhoods with smaller housing and typologies that were inspired by the traditional local architecture, also local techniques and building materials. And the main or most detailed design was the Superblock L37, designed for the government employees. And for me, the most interesting was to see how many housing typologies Nowicki proposed for this one housing area, which were based on the studies of Indian homes, the structures for brise soleil that could create some shading or cooling the interiors, the use of bricks, which were easily to be found in the on-site, and creation of different types of yard that would extend the space of house to the exterior, but also these various typologies we can find in the civic districts, for the schools, for markets and public use buildings, as well as the design for capital. Here, the one of the proposals, and the other one where here we have several buildings. Here, one huge plateau with general People's Assembly, and this again the structural form that was symbolic in a way, and creating the new center of the city. And yes, but in addition to this large-scale project, there are many unbuilt visions that he was working. They were both working on during their stay in the United States, and while continues his work with Harrison on the United Nations headquarters, he began also collaborating with Clarence Stein, for instance, on the design for the elevated platform at the Columbus Circle, and some designs for markets in California, housing in North Carolina, Museum of Art and Science, and history, also not built, Carolina Country Club in Raleigh, and the new typology for schools for architectural forum. Also, he collaborated with Eero Saarinen on the Brandeis University in Massachusetts plans and chapel designs there. So here just the forum schools, Carolina Country Club interiors, the university, and that's it. So thank you very much.
All right, hello everybody, good evening. Thanks for being here for this amazing set of events. Thank you, Carolina, and for your introduction, and thank you and Kasper, the AIA Center for Architecture and the Polish Cultural Institute in New York, especially Isabella Goya, for organizing this wonderful panel tonight as well. Also, I want to add my congratulations on the wonderful exhibition and big thanks to all the organizers of that event, near and far, the Polish Cultural Ministry and the Polish Mission to the UN and others, as Carolina mentioned. The talks last night were really heartfelt and enjoyable as well. So all the people who provided the talks for the exhibition, it was very nice to be there. So it's really wonderful to be participating in this overdue discussion on the role and influence of Polish architects and designers in the conceptualization of the post-war world. On that note, I do want to have a local thank yous to the Polish American Club of Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill area. The honorary consul, Mark Fountain, is here tonight all the way from Raleigh. And was here last night as well, for establishing, the Polish American Club established the Maciej Nowicki Endowment at NC State College of Design in 2023, coinciding with the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the school there. The endowment is going to support continued research on Polish architects, designers, and engineers, as well as the myriad urban, social, and political landscapes they were working in. So I'm going to come back to that endowment towards the end. Big thanks goes to the Polish Embassy in Washington, D.C., the Deputy Ambassador, Adam Szyleszański, and the Cultural Attaché, Katarzyna Rybka-Iwanska, who was here last night, for their support and endorsement of that endowment through multiple visits to Raleigh, the college, and the Nowicki archives at NC State. So for me, it's been a great pleasure working with everyone on this project. And I hope that it's only the beginning, actually, as we also want to bring the exhibition and a similar panel to Raleigh and NC State next fall. So I hope everyone can plan to come to the continuation of this discussion there. So please stay tuned for our updates on that. There's a little postcard with information on the endowment and also which links to a website that will give you information on these events. So visit that periodically. Very good. So when Kasper, Carolina, Isabella, and I first started talking about the organization of this panel, Kasper asked me if I could perhaps talk a little bit about, I should go to my slide here, perhaps talk a little bit about the various ways that the Dorton Arena is currently being used and perceived within Raleigh and North Carolina. So I think this is a great question to start with. Not only methodologically speaking, as it allows us to read the building of the Dorton Arena and its landscape beyond the intentions of its architects, but also in terms of thinking about how those intentions were received and carried out within Raleigh and in the American South. I think the idea of a humanist modernity is a great way to frame these questions of reception. Arindam Dutta, my history theory colleague at MIT, referred to this idea of a humanist modernity as a techno-social moment. I think that's a good one too, and I myself have referred to it as a post-war constructivism, if you will, in my lectures and writings on the Nowickis. So yes, as much as we architects and historians like to talk about the pioneering form and structure of the building, as well as its social content, the building itself, with its physical context in the North Carolina State Fairgrounds, is a celebrated populist icon that served to shelter and as the background for a wide range of events, from antique car and monster truck, RV and gun and knife shows to rodeos and various concerts. And it, of course, also serves as the centerpiece of the state fair held annually in October each year. Very much loved event. It was interestingly the venue of choice for former President Trump's campaign rallies in Raleigh, the capital city for North Carolina, and it also is also unmistakably tied to pro wrestling history in the region. So, in fact, there's a documentary film about to come out on pro wrestling history. Perhaps we can feature that as part of the events in Raleigh, actually, to kind of conflate the various ways that the building is remembered. But my point is, a social history of this building and the fairgrounds would reveal nothing short of not only the historical background, but also the current state of American democracy and politics. So, so the question arises, how much of this content, how much of this current social and political landscape resembles or reflects the Nowicki's original conceptualization of a humanist modernity? In an essay I wrote as the opening piece to the Built-Unbuilt issue I guest edited for the Southern Cultures magazine, I refer to this landscape as an incomplete modernism that we continue to grapple with in our current social and political debates. I put forward this idea of an incomplete modernism not so much because of the pieces of the Nowicki's master plan, such as the public park for the in-zone of the horse and car racetrack, or the new grandstands that they had designed, where the people of North Carolina were to come together as a diverse and cohesive society to watch the annual fireworks show at the state fair. Or the missing exhibition halls, the exhibition halls went in that area. The projector is really so strong that it's really washing out some of our slides, but I'm wondering if we could maybe turn down some of the floodlights just a little bit, if that might help the images. But they look great on the screen. I wish you could see this. So the exhibition halls that would have brought together artifacts of scientific research, technology, manufacturing, fine arts, and local crafts. A new building for the North Carolina Museum of Art was later built just up the road in 1987, designed by a well-known architect, Edward Durrell Stone. But the elimination of the exhibition hall and the park from this particular ensemble, whether intentional or not, does change the makeup of the humanist modernity that the Nowickis were after. So let's consider the question, what was that modernity? And why were these particular components necessary for its realization? Frankly, we could focus our attention on any of Nowicki's projects to unpack and understand the pieces of this modernity. But I'm going to start with this particularly innovative curriculum that the Nowickis developed, that you see there, and Casper also shared with us, that the Nowickis had developed for the School of Design at NC State in collaboration with Louis Mumford. They visualized the new curriculum through the curious figure of this expressionist tree, if you will. To me, it looks as though they were in conversation with Van Gogh's trees as they drew this one. But this tree also becomes a signature piece for them, as it appears in many of their drawings. I published a short piece on the genealogy and meaning of this tree in our Design Life magazine at the school, and I'm working on a longer piece on that at the moment, actually, because it's quite interesting. Briefly speaking, for this talk, the significance of the Nowicki tree can perhaps best be understood in comparison to another, perhaps more familiar tree. Sir Bannister Fletcher's Tree of Architecture, many of you know this, appeared in the inside cover of his seminal book, History of Architecture, in successive editions over a daunting 60-year term from 1890 to 1954. Fletcher's tree diagrammed how, up until the 1950s, architectural knowledge was defined in a Hegelian manner as a series of stylistic and dialectical progressions. In other words, if you knew and understood the defining elements of each style, then voila, you were an expert, connoisseur of architecture. Well, this one is also a little odd in its own way, as it looks more like those cell towers that you see by the highway. But in contrast, the Nowicki tree depicted architectural knowledge emerging not through disciplinary connoisseurship, but through a combination of studies in multiple disciplines, including landscape design, architectural design for sure, structures, descriptive drawing, humanities and history, city planning, and other general education courses in English literature, modern languages, and recreation, and so on. We can think of this tree as a type of legend through which to read Nowicki's humanist modernity. This idea of an interdisciplinary and liberal education, as commonplace as it might sound today, was a revolutionary idea at that time. And it reminds us why interdisciplinary matters today. Since it sought to battle social fragmentation and the rise of fascism caused by overspecialization in industrialized economies. I refer to this interdisciplinarity as a post-war constructivism because it literally sought to reconstruct society by bringing disciplines back together. If the curriculum provided the conceptual framework of a humanist education, the Nowicki's design for the first student union building at NC State was the spatial manifestation of that idea on campus. Notice the trees there coming in from the sides. This was to be the place where students studying in different disciplines would come together to participate in various social and cultural activities. It housed an auditorium, multi-purpose exhibition and lecture halls, and a dining hall. The union was designed to act as the centerpiece of an outdoor university plaza that you see on your right, later designed by Richard Bell to house even larger crowds to further encourage habits of interdisciplinary cooperation and socialization for faculty and students. The Nowickis had developed some of these ideas about higher education the year before they came to NC State during their collaboration with Eero Saarinen on the design of the Brandeis University campus, as Casper mentioned. At Brandeis, you see the student union positioned right here next to the main library, just like at NC State, and between the athletic fields beyond and the university plaza closer to you, which was also flanked by the College of Arts and Sciences and the Performing Arts Center with the dome over here. This was essentially the exact application of the tree diagram to the spatial organization of an institution of higher learning. Eero Saarinen carried this idea directly to MIT's University Plaza with the design of the Kresge Auditorium and the MIT Chapel with slightly different roof. Sorry, I don't have that image in my slide deck. While the Nowickis brought it to NC State. So here's a few current day views of the student union and its view of the University Plaza from that slide, which is going through a new renovation and a new building addition at the moment, an integrative sciences building and initiative, which follows certainly from Nowicki's footsteps to bring in interdisciplinary collaboration and exchange to the space. So I'm really glad to see that. But another interesting connection, and this one many of you may not know about, is the early master plan for the Middle East Technical University campus in Ankara, Turkey, the topic of my recent book, Landed Internationals. Stanisława, after moving to the University of Pennsylvania, was involved in forming the initial ideas for the campus there, which she characteristically did not claim any credit for. and this is interesting. But you see her trees there, and also the same academic center that we saw at Brandeis, NC State, and MIT. Another way that the Nowickis were implementing their ideas was through the design of a series of federally subsidized housing projects that Maciej had begun to work on in William Dietrich's office in Raleigh. However, during the 1930s and through the 1950s, social housing and community development was conceptualized in a relatively limited way in Raleigh. My students and I are currently exploring the history and legacy of housing in Raleigh, actually, but also in relation to other projects of post-war development. Because it's only when we set these projects up in relation to other sites that the Nowickis were working on, like the Leaf Plan and Chandigarh, not only the full scope of their ideas begins to emerge, but also these comparisons tell us about the social political context in which these projects were being carried out, which portions are being carried out where, to what extent, and so on. In the example of Chandigarh, India, with Albert Meyer, we can see how they were organizing different types of housing in relation to social, educational, recreational, and religious spaces to form the components of a more humanist modernity. On this site, we built with students over the years at NC State. You see Raleigh and Chandigarh as the kind of the beginning point of this website. Chandigarh and Raleigh down here, those were the first two nodes that we started with. We explored the multiple pieces of this global network, which I think Lukáš will talk more about, which I'm very excited about. So coming back to the question of the legacy of a humanist modernity in Raleigh and in the American South, we can ask, so how much of the ideals of the city of the future exhibited in the Democracy exhibition of the 1939 New York World's Fair got implemented in Raleigh? Or we can ask, how did the idea of the post-war American city and political economy was mediated and contested and implemented in multiple contexts, such as Raleigh and so on? Actually, driving in from JFK, it was great to see the Flushing Meadows site there. Yeah, so that's another important site, I think, that relates to this. In the case of Raleigh, it manifested itself, unfortunately, as a hyper-segregated city based on race and class. This map shows the areas we examined in my schools and neighborhood studio, where we explored how a school building program under separate but equal Jim Crow laws was utilized to hyper-segregate the black and white populations of the city in order to optimize real estate and development potentials, instead of aiming to build a cohesive and equitable society. Coming back to Dorton and the fairgrounds, they were to act as a place where the farmers' kids met the scientists to get on rides, eat cotton candy, and watch the fireworks shows during the annual state fair. But Mumford and the Nowickis were, and perhaps had to be, less outspoken about racial integration and equity within the political climate of the South. We can talk more about this during the discussion. However, the Dorton Arena and the fairgrounds look back at us as a lasting reminder of the humanist modernity that the Nowickis envisioned for the post-war world. At NC State, we continue to study these sites as stewards of these ideals and landscapes. The Polish-American Club's generous and visionary endowment is already helping us to do that more effectively, as already evidenced by the fact that it connected us with you, through in these events, and at the future events in Raleigh, hopefully. Forgive me for including our QR code that links you to that website, and so you can stay in touch with the updates on what's happening next. And and where you can find more information on that endowment. So please come to Raleigh as we host the exhibition there and continue to discuss there about these ideas and about humanist modernity's past and present. We have many more aspects of these questions to look into in all these sites that Kasper shared with us. Again, many thanks, and I look forward to the discussion and your questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation to join this panel, and huge congratulations to Kacper and Carolina and the rest of the team on the exhibition. I would like to continue talking about the work of Polish and Eastern European architects in the Global South during the Cold War. But in difference to the trajectory of Maciej and Stanisława Nowicki in India and in Turkey, I'm going to focus on architects who traveled abroad within state socialist networks, so networks established by state socialist institutions. And I will show how they faced questions that were similar to those faced by the Nowickis in their work. And that included notably the question of mobilizing the professional competence and the historical experience of Polish and Eastern European architecture when these professionals worked across Asia and Africa. So the question I'd like to address today is this: what was mobile or portable in this architecture during the Cold War, and what were the conditions of this portability or mobility? And I addressed these questions in my last book, titled Architecture and Global Socialism. The book was published in 2020. It shows how, during the Cold War, architects from socialist Eastern Europe collaborated with other architects and planners and construction companies in the Middle East and in West Africa. The book is really a portrait of 5 cities, and you can see them on the screen in the table of contents. Accra, the capital of Ghana; Lagos in Nigeria; Baghdad in Iraq; Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates; and Kuwait City. The book shows how these cities were co-produced by local actors and their counterparts from socialist countries. Now, in recent years, architectural historians, including Borak, studied the accelerated mobility of architecture after World War II. Historians wrote about colonial and post-colonial networks from Western Europe, about technical assistance from the United States, about international organizations such as the United Nations, and about networks of economic globalization. I'm sorry, this has a life of its own. So what my book contributes to this discussion is to focus on networks of the socialist countries. And in so doing, it emphasizes the multiplicity and heterogeneity of networks which contributed to modern architecture becoming worldwide. And that includes the heterogeneity and multiplicity of the socialist networks themselves. I'm thinking here about the Sino-Soviet split, or the split between the Soviet Union and China, but also about the differentiation of the Eastern European socialist countries themselves. And in my book, I coined the term global socialism precisely to address this multiplicity. I follow the official discourse of socialist internationalism that was conveyed by these posters, but I'm also talking about the production of global socialism from below. I study encounters between people from socialist and newly independent countries that often transgressed that official discourse of socialist internationalism. Global socialism remained between the descriptive and the normative, but in this way it produced frameworks of interaction and exchange of very real things, among them architectural resources. Now, let me come back to the main question of this short talk today. What was the competence and the experiences that architects from socialist countries relied on when working across Africa and Asia during the Cold War? And I would think that each chapter of my book offers a different answer to this question. When we start with Ghana during the 1960s, that's the first way of answering this question. Many of you may know, Ghana was the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to become independent from a European colonial power. And in that sense, it was a key location for Cold War competition. Under the Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviets offered political, economic, and technical assistance to the Ghanaian government under the president, Kwame Nkrumah, who attended many meetings in Moscow and attempted to embark on a socialist development path. And that Soviet support included, for example, the transfer of Soviet technology, large-scale prefabrication technology of housing, which you see here. But it also included the hiring of Polish and Eastern European architects by state institutions in Ghana, which were in charge of the implementation of the programs of industrialization, agricultural development, and social welfare distribution. And here you see some of their designs, including housing designs. However, collaboration with socialist countries was attractive also to those African and Asian governments that did not follow the socialist development model. And Nigeria was one of them. In deference to Ghana, Nigerian elites were generally hostile towards socialism. They invited Eastern Europeans not to implement the socialist development model, but rather to stimulate economic development more generally. And that is relevant for my book because it shows that architectural mobilities from the socialist countries reached far beyond Soviet client states. Accordingly, rather than referring to socialism, Eastern European architects working in Nigeria sought for other ways to make sense of the task at hand. And in this chapter, I study how architects and planners imagined the worlds which they shared with Africans. In particular, they pointed out at the shared experience, or the shared experience of foreign domination over Eastern Europe and Africa during the long 19th century. That domination contributed to economic backwardness and cultural dependency in both regions. Importantly, this is not just a question about the legitimization of the work of Eastern Europeans in Nigeria. What was at stake was really something more relevant, I would think. What was at stake was the use of specific architectural tools from Eastern European architectural culture, which responded to this predicament ostensibly shared by Eastern Europeans and Nigerians. And I am developing this argument by means of several case studies. They include the use of Hungarian regional planning method in the master planning of Nigerian cities, but I'm also talking about the use of Polish survey and drawing techniques in the study of vernacular buildings in Nigeria. I also look at how these studies, such as the one on the right by a man called Zbigniew Dmachowski and his Polish-Nigerian team, how these studies were consequential for the debates about what would Nigerian architecture mean after independence. And also, crucially, they were very significant for architectural education in Nigeria. And so, in this way, the chapter on Nigeria shows how Eastern Europeans instrumentalized historical analogies between Eastern Europe and West Africa. But it also reveals the limits to these analogies and the racialized inequalities that were intrinsic to global socialism. What reverberated in these dynamics were the ambiguities of Eastern Europe's own colonial history. That included the history of the so-called internal colonization in Tsarist Russia, but also in other countries, notably interwar Poland. Now, the next chapter focuses on Iraq. It shows the acceleration of architectural mobilities from socialist countries in the wake of the oil embargoes of the 1970s. In response to the debt crisis in Eastern Europe, these countries boosted their exports to obtain convertible currency. That included very much the export of architecture and construction services, for which the oil-producing countries became major recipients, in particular countries in the Middle East and around the Mediterranean. Now, these mercantile motivations informed the collaboration between Eastern Europeans and Iraqi architects, planners, and construction companies in Baghdad. And I argue that during these collaborations, they instrumentalized the differences between an emerging global market of design and construction services and the political economy of state socialism. Specifically, I write about the inconvertibility of Eastern European currencies, but also I discuss the principle of barter, which is, as you know, an exchange of a good for a good without the mediation of money. And that could include, for instance, an exchange of a building for crude oil. While offering the design and construction services in 1970s Middle East, institutions from various Eastern European countries claimed distinct architectural expertise. And so, for instance, during the competition for this master plan of Baghdad, the Polish team referred to the reconstruction of Warsaw after World War II as a significant experience. But, for instance, Bulgarians promoted the tourist architecture around the Black Sea, and East Germans claim competence in highly advanced technologically highly advanced prefabricated systems. Accordingly, this chapter on Baghdad emphasizes a competition between various design institutes and construction companies from socialist countries, because sometimes these claims to competence not only overlapped, but also clashed. And this competition also comes to the fore in the last chapter of the book, which focuses on the work of Eastern Europeans in the United Arab Emirates and in Kuwait during the final decade of the Cold War. By discussing buildings such as these, I show how actors from socialist countries became integrated into the Western-dominated market of design and construction services in the Gulf. And their work differed in two ways from what I discussed earlier in the book. First, these architects tended to move away from the tradition of modern architecture. And secondly, they did not refer to socialism. Rather, they claimed technical and cultural competence on par with their Western competitors. But I argue in this chapter, and as a key argument of this part of the book, that they were able to claim that competence because of their previous experience in the Middle East, in networks of socialist internationalism. And in this way, by focusing on the Gulf, the book inscribes socialist internationalism into a more heterogeneous and antagonistic history of architecture's globalization at the turn of the century. So let me wrap it up. As you have seen in this very brief presentation, very rarely were Eastern European architects involved in the implementation of socialist development in the 5 cities that I studied. In other cities, they were very much involved in that project, but not in Accra, Lagos, Baghdad, Abu Dhabi, and Kuwait City. However, in all these places, their work was consistently conditioned by the political economy of state socialism. In particular, the book shows how architects and managers from socialist countries and their local counterparts exploited the differences between the socialist political economy on the one hand and on the other, the market of design and construction services dominated by Western enterprises, whether that domination took place in a colonial context or in a globalist context. And it was in that framework that Polish and Eastern European architects mobilized their professional culture. They contributed to international debates, including the debates about the adaptation of post-war modern architecture to climatic, technological, social, and cultural conditions across various geographies. In so doing, these architects tapped into longer traditions of architecture in Eastern Europe, which addressed issues that were very important for their counterparts in the newly independent countries, whether that these were questions of national identity or, for instance, the question of developing the countryside. By the end of the Cold War, these architects contributed to the criticism of modern architecture. That questioning was both inspired by broader international debates, but also by the experience of modernism, if you like, as it actually existed in the socialist countries. Some of these experiences prepared Eastern Europeans for practicing architecture in the region after the end of socialism, which is a story for another occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Łukasz, Burak, and Kacper, and I invite you for what probably will be a brief discussion given the time, but I'm very happy to have all those three presentations together, and especially Łukasz, I'm going to start with you because I think you gave us the most zoomed out and perspective and the most global context in a sense of a context that has not been typically considered in the history of architecture. And especially your book, The Global Socialism, gives completely different outlook at the history of architecture, at those who contributed to it, in the condition in which it existed, as opposed to the kind of Western narratives that probably all of us were trained. And my personal experience as somebody coming from Eastern Europe to study in the US and sometimes bringing up those examples in my own classes, I found myself being kind of an outlier because nobody else, even my professors, ever heard of those projects, which made me realize that indeed there is a huge part of the architectural history that it's simply untold. And even Kenneth Frampton, in his 5th edition of the Modern Architecture recently, in the introduction, mentioned that there needs to be a widened scope of the thinking about architecture and moving away from kind of Eurocentric or somewhat described as transatlantic outlook on architectural history. So thank you for kind of introducing that book. I think the book itself and your studies are kind of topic for another lecture and perhaps an exhibition. Oh. I'm supposed to not switch them on. Okay, I'll keep it closer. That's better? Okay, sorry about that. But I think as an architect who is mostly engaging on the kind of practice side, I always value input of architectural historians and theoreticians. And I want to ask Łukasz, today, at the day and age in which the kind of global forces are definitely shifting, where economic powers are different than a century ago, as 50 years ago, as we're facing kind of climate change and a different climate future that those architects we talked about dealt with. What would you say are the lessons of this two Western but also Eastern perspective that you're presenting in your book into how architects could be or should be practicing in the future? The mics should be on, but I guess we have to keep them very close.
Right, thank you. That is that is a complex question for a historian, isn't it? Maybe just to start it off, let me say that it is always a really interesting contrast when I present this material, let's say in New York or in Zurich or in London, then there are very, very few people who have ever heard of any of this stuff. By contrast, when I present it in Accra or in Lagos or in Beirut, half of the audience not only knows it, but also knows people who are directly involved into these activities because they were their colleagues or their parents' colleagues or their professors. And so there is really a huge contrast and one which we perhaps should think about what it means that architectural history is perceived so differently across these locations. Now, in terms of lessons, I think, and I'm kind of formulating these thoughts on the go by thinking about my work as guest professor in Accra for a semester last year, where I could have a more closer engagement with students, with Ghanaian students, but also a closer engagement with colleagues Ghanaian architects, but also other professionals. And I think that there is a huge interest in these histories, not so much because there were histories of some foreigners who were coming and doing stuff, but rather because they were very much seen as part of the post-independence architecture. So we are really talking about the first generation of Ghanaian architects, most of whom were educated in the UK, some of them in the US, and then some of them slowly in Eastern European countries, and then finally in Ghana itself, which became a major hub for architecture education. And so these were the experiences that are most interesting for current audiences in Ghana and across West Africa, but also for students, how to reconstruct a history or after independence, the challenges that were stemming from the power dependencies resulting from the colonial period, but also from new types of hegemonies and dangers of hegemonies. To what extent, for example, the Soviet Union was a new hegemonic power. So I think that maybe for me, and I would think at least for some of my friends and colleagues in Accra, what can be learned from these experiences are the modalities of collaboration, how architects collaborate, what are the institutional frameworks to collaborate, what are the intellectual frameworks in which they collaborate, what are, for example, the pedagogical institutions that they work on together. What is remarkable about at least most of the stories that I talk about is that these architects were hired by indigenous institutions, right? They were not, most of them, they were not commissioned one design which then they brought to the country, but rather they were, hired, they had a Ghanaian boss who directed their work. And so these are the types, and an organization of labor, I strongly believe the organization of architectural labor has a huge consequence on not only how architecture is produced, but also what comes out of that production. So I think these are, and I will stop here, these are perhaps the first things that come to mind. What are actually the conditions of architecture collaboration in circumstances that are evidently uneven and unequal. And these asymmetries and unevenness did not go away, even if they are different, as you said. And so to think about them in a very kind of self-aware way, how to collaborate in the conditions of these asymmetries, maybe that's the first lesson.
Thank you very much. I have at least 5 follow-up questions, but I'll ask them after. But I think that's a great insight. Kacper, the exhibition and the events are kind of organized around Nowicki, which is a different type of migration of a Polish architect than Łukasz is talking about, but still kind of showcases the ingenuity of all of those designers. What I think it's very interesting and very exciting to see, it's the kind of fluency between different scales and context and local conditions that Nowickis were working, given their kind of education and upbringing in Poland, then being transplanted into the US and engaging that context, and then Maciej Nowicki's commission of Chandigarh, and you were showing some of the very detailed diagrams analyzing wind patterns, but also a kind of very specific shading devices, I believe, that were supposed to correspond to local conditions. And I want to maybe kind of broaden the question beyond Nowicki's, because I know you're studying a lot of other Polish architects, also a lot of Polish women architects who were quite prominent at the time, and part of very interesting work now that is happening is uncovering those figures. And I want you to kind of maybe talk about importance of that kind of fluency between scales, but also how it was, or maybe wasn't, part of the education in Poland, and how that kind of is different from other architects, maybe from abroad, that you see in the same period.
Okay, so that is another very complex question, because first I think there is a question of education, but then there is a question of this particular context of war and post-war reconstruction. And what we see also in case of Nowicki's is that these small-scale designs and starting with graphic works, but also the first, in fact, the first commission of Maciej Nowicki was a house for his parents, and that were the designs before the war mostly, or continued during the war under the occupation. And also those were the works that they've been doing just after graduation, which also the studying back then was taking much more time than now. It was normal to study for 7 years, 8 years, and to work on the same time. So we can also observe some bigger projects done with already renowned architects, in case of Maciej, for instance. But I think that this shift in scale happened with the post-war reconstruction, and we can observe it in case of Nowicki's, but not only. We have another great stories of architects couples as Oskar and Zofia Hansens, and they were also explaining that this particular urban scale, the task of rebuilding the country, the possibilities it case, it was only possible in these circumstances of post-war reconstruction and the socialist country also. So it was also important what was the system for them in case of Hansen, for instance. So, for the reconstruction of Warsaw, we have, of course, many, because Maciej Nowicki ran the workshop of architectural discussion, and they were producing dozens of designs. This what I shown was like a few examples of what they produced, and that was an effort of many architects. It wasn't the one appointed architect that rebuilt the city, and some of those ideas like reusing rubbles and creating the architecture of what was there already were implemented later in the designs of different architects like Muranov and Lahert's ideas for reuse of rubble. So yeah, and then we have this story of pre-war traditions of housing, and that I think is also very important for these architects who continue working after the war. That I think the most interesting part of interwar Polish architecture history would be the housing for associations creating affordable housing for workers, like in Żoliborz and Warsaw Housing Association. So they were very much into this small scale, and then translated into housing typologies, for instance, in Chandigarh, where I believe that he really studied the local context. So yes, I think there is also this influence of this willingness to understand the other, or to incorporate different contexts of like social context or historical context in these designs, also comes from the very context of Central Europe, where those countries were newly established. They were studying as the first students of the faculties that were created in independent Poland, and so on. So the exchange of knowledge was obvious. They were working with all the neighboring countries, and in very different and also very diverse society back then. So they also had to answer these particular questions of building, in case of Nowicki's mosque, the church, the synagogue. So it wasn't really really connected with one particular client, or one type of clients, or one social group they were designing for. So I think this diversity of pre-war Central Europe, but also the post-war reconstruction, was the most influential for this.
Thank you. I think, yeah, we could keep unpacking, but it's really great to hear your view on that. Burak, when I watched the pictures, the current pictures, or like not so more recent pictures of Dorton Arena, I was actually thinking of recently watched Jacques Tati movie, just blanked on the name, Playtime. And, you know, because I'm used to look at the Dorton Arena's drawings as beautiful kind of modernist structure without people in them, as much as we, you know, claim, humanist modernity. And like in the movie, where a man arrives to a very kind of modern city with perfect layout and the perfect polished surfaces that work perfectly until it doesn't, where people and life and kind of everyday activities arrive to that city and kind of change how it's perceived. That's how I saw Dorton Arena, where you showed it filled with either the fighting ring or at festivals. And I know that Kacper is going to Dorton Arena on Saturday, because on Sunday there is a Vietnamese festival or some other event held there. So it seems like the building is very much alive, and it's kind of able to hold many functions. So for you as architectural historian, which aspect of the building is the most important or more interesting? Is it the real kind of modernist structure, a building, you know, as it was designed, as it was kind of sketched out, its logic, its kind of rhythm of the facade, or the kind of afterlife, perhaps expanding what architect planned for it?
Yeah, thank you. No, I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think, you know, maybe it relates to your first question as well, this question of canon, and not just only what we include in the canon, perhaps in the Western canon, but how we talk about what's in it. So speaking of Dorton Arena, perhaps, you know, beyond its form or structure, I mean, the social function of the fairgrounds and the Dortmund Arena as an assembly space that would bring together all these various manifestations of culture, and within that space was very much part of what I think the purpose of that space was from the beginning. That's actually, as I came to NC State, that was the narrative. I was surprised that that narrative wasn't there, and sort of like, okay, everyone is talking about like Buckminster Fuller and the structural innovations of the parabolic arches and the reinforced concrete, which are important things to know about for students and professionals and so on. But the social function was largely missing from that canon, and so the curriculum collaborations with Lewis Mumford, this notion of how do we utilize technology in the service of society instead of against it, in this immediate post-war period where Mumford was outspoken critic of the use of the atomic bomb on civilians, for instance. That was one of the major things that, how do we use technology in the post-war world, and how do we create engineers and professionals who are conscious, who have some, acting through conscientious behavior in making decisions on how we utilize the innovations that we come up with. So using the technological and structural innovations of that structure, using little materials, right? There's a great economy and sustainability to the structure, through which to then using that to create a space uninterrupted by columns and to bring agricultural, scientific agriculture, as well as cars, which unfortunately Mumford was a great proponent for the regional city and so on, which is so that's kind of the reality of that we have to live with now. This mid-sized American landscape city, so I don't know if that, I'll stop there. If that's, I mean, the social function of this, not only the site, but the building itself, was, I think, very central, and the structure and the service of that,
Katie, do you have time? Do we have time for the questions from the audience? Okay, I have more, but I'll maybe turn the mic into the audience. We probably have time for like 2 questions, depending on the level of complication.
Thank you very much for this presentation and everybody who's been involved in the exhibition. It's wonderful that the Nowickis are getting more of the attention they deserve here in New York. I just want to share 2 very brief comments. I was a student at the University of Pennsylvania in the early 1970s, and Stanisława Nowicki was a very important and beloved teacher of ours. She got us first semester, first year, Studio 1. And so very formative influence.
She was teaching Core 1, which is the most important course
Yes,
probably
the core values. And even to this day, when I'm dealing with a young architect in my own office, or when I'm teaching and students, I hear Mrs. Nowicki in my ear saying, too much, simplify. She was a very kind but severe critic, always right. And years later, after she retired from Penn and moved to New York City, she closed her house outside of Philadelphia and moved into an apartment, I think it was on 83rd Street, 84th Street. And I contacted her and went to visit with another classmate of mine. And she had said she was living in this apartment, all white, all very reduced. She said that her idea of retirement heaven was to be within walking distance of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And she said that she felt liberated. She had gotten rid of everything. She had accumulated too much stuff in her life. But she said, but there are some old things that just for sentimental reasons I couldn't give up. Like this chaise longue, Le Corbusier gave it to me, and the dining set, Walter Gropius. It was a prototype that he rejected and then improved upon those chairs. It was a phenomenal visit, but I remember her so very fondly. Great influence.
Would you you mind sharing your name?
Yeah, Belmont Freeman, Monty Freeman.
Thank you. I think there was a question in the back.
Thanks for sharing everything that you all have shared already. I'm really curious about the topic of humanist modernity. And you all talked about interdisciplinariness, the deep integration of humanism, the person perspective views in the sketches. But I'm really curious, as someone who works in service design, what methods were used in the different projects to integrate the humanism, not as a byproduct, but as an integration into the design-making practices.
I assume that's the question for Kacper. Everybody's welcome to answer.
Yeah, for me, but also I think Burak would also elaborate on this. Well, yes, that is complicated questions for me because yes, I analyzed those designs mostly as a products. Yes, so I won't be pretending that I research much more about the process behind those designs. The thing of the process for designing the Warsaw reconstruction, for instance, that was the characteristic of that. This was created in a very short time. Several different design practices or workshops or teams of architects working independently but together on the one task, mostly about talking, checking their visions, trying to find a way to cope with what was already there and the shortage of everything. So I think that that was this the main thing that they were doing was simply talking with each other, and that was discussion, and that was also the name of their workshop in Wilanów Palace that Maciej Nowicki ran. So the architectural discussion and trying to find an answers by talking and by drawing, by producing many alternatives for the same task, many designs for the same place, then picking one, but not exactly even drawn by one architect, but then creating something together. And then it was seen also in a lot of the writings about Nowicki's, that they were always trying to talk with everyone, to try to understand their perspective, to translate the design to the others, to try to look from the perspective of the users. So I think, yeah, this I don't think there were many tools that were taken from, I don't know, sociological tools or surveys that were doing, but I think it was more the process of the discussion and the testing different options. But yes, that is my guess, not the research-based answer. I don't know if you have something to add from Rally designs.
Well, I mean, yeah, thank you for that question. I think as Kacper is, I like the way that you're talking about this, Kacper. I mean, there is a very different process. I think that's also, maybe that's one thing that we have to talk a little bit more about or look into in terms of the process through which that the Nowickis were approached these design problems. There's strong evidence that, you know, instead of like sitting down and drawing a plan or a master plan of an idea, there's you know, strong evidence that there's the conversation and a kind of an bird's eye view of a possibility, very easily kind of visualized on a tracing paper. Many of these drawings are actually on yellow trace paper that are about the size of about, like, let's say 24 by 36, just drawn by really a number 2 pencil with some color pencils to highlight certain lines and areas and so on. So there's a genius behind the way, the ability to visualize very with ease, kind of dancing, allowing the pencil to kind of dance across the page and to kind of allow the form to emerge. So that is very, I think that does bring, I don't know if that really resembles the way that Stanisława taught design or drew with students. I think that's also a research question. I think that we still have to go back and maybe talk with some more people. But I think Kasper is doing some of this already, but and in terms of their education as well in Poland.
And I think this curriculum and the tree itself would maybe tell more about the way he perceived architecture and how should be done. Also, when we read about his involvement in UN headquarters project, he was also described a lot as a person who moderated the discussion, who was able to find a way to talk with all these huge, like, very major figures of architecture back then, and trying to find the common ground for the discussion. So.
All right, thank you. We'll have to wrap it up given our time, but I'm sure you can continue discussion while moving up the stairs. And thank you, Łukasz, thank you, Kacper, thank you, Barak, for your presentations. Thank you, Center for Architecture, for hosting us. I think there's still some spots available for the tours on Friday. Go to the Center for Architecture website, and if you're lucky, you'll get a spot. But as we said, the exhibition will be traveling. We'll go to North Carolina, and then we'll actually come back to New York here, so you will still have a chance to look at the work. Thank you very much.